The students called him Library Larry behind his back. Just another old security guard who spent his days checking ID cards and telling people to be quiet. He never corrected them, never mentioned his past, just sat at his desk reading books they couldn't even pronounce until one morning, a brilliant young professor noticed what he was reading. Advanced theoretical physics that only a handful of people in the world could understand. And that's when she realized the man they'd been ignoring might be the reason she had a career at all. Welcome to Forgotten Voices. Before we begin this incredible story of hidden brilliance, forgotten genius, and the price of silence, tell me in the comments, from which city are you watching this video today? And if you believe that wisdom often wears the most ordinary disguise, hit that subscribe button and help us honor those whose greatest achievements remain invisible. Asterisk the Hamilton University Physics Library opened its doors at 7 a.m. sharp every morning, but Lawrence Larry Mitchell was always there by 6:45. He wore the same navy blue security uniform 5 days a week, pressed but faded, with a small name tag that simply read L. Mitchell Security. No rank, no credentials, no hint of anything beyond what people could see. He was 67 years old, moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose knees remembered better days, and had the kind of face that disappeared into crowds. His routine never varied. Clock in at the front desk, check the overnight logs, walk a quiet perimeter of the 3-story building, and settle into his chair by the main entrance. Students would flash their IDs. He'd nod them through, and that was the extent of most interactions. During breaks, he'd pull out a book from his worn leather satchel and read in silence, occasionally making notes in the margins with a pencil he kept sharp. The students had nicknamed him Library Larry during his first week 3 years ago. It wasn't meant to be cruel, just casual campus shorthand for the old guy who sat by the door. Most barely noticed him. He was part of the furniture, like the broken clock in the second-floor hallway or the vending machine that ate quarters. Present but irrelevant. Dr. Sarah Chen was different. She was 28, brilliant, and had just completed her PhD in theoretical physics at MIT before accepting a postdoctoral position at Hamilton. She specialized in quantum field theory and had published papers that made seasoned physicists stop and take notice. Sarah was ambitious, confident, and had little patience for anything that didn't advance her research. She noticed Larry for the first time on a Tuesday morning in September. She was rushing to the library, late for a meeting with her advisor, when she dropped her stack of research papers right in front of the security desk. As she scrambled to collect them, she caught a glimpse of what Larry was reading during his break. It was Weinberg's The Quantum Theory of Fields, Volume 3. Not a textbook, not a popular science book, but a dense, mathematical treatise that most PhD students struggled with. Sarah paused, papers half collected, staring at the man, who was casually flipping through equations that had taken her months to understand. Interesting choice, she said, more curious than friendly. Larry looked up, his gray eyes meeting hers for perhaps the first time since she'd started coming to the library. It's good material, he said simply. Weinberg always had a gift for clarity. Sarah blinked. Not only was he reading advanced physics, but he was talking about Steven Weinberg like he knew him personally. She gathered her papers and hurried off. But the encounter stuck with her. Over the following weeks, Sarah began paying attention to Larry's reading habits. During her frequent visits to the library, she'd glance at his desk and take note of what he was studying. The books changed regularly, but they were always advanced, always current, always well beyond what anyone would expect from a security guard. One day it was Penrose's The Road to Reality. Another day it was a collection of papers from the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton. She watched him work through complex mathematical proofs with the same ease that others might read a newspaper. But it was the margins that really caught her attention. Larry didn't just read these books, he annotated them. His handwriting was small and precise, filled with corrections, alternative approaches, and what appeared to be original insights. When she finally worked up the courage to ask him about it, his response was typically modest. Just keeping my mind active, he said. Retirement can be boring. Sarah's curiosity evolved into something deeper. When she overheard a conversation between two senior professors in the faculty lounge, they were discussing a particularly challenging problem in quantum chromodynamics, debating approaches that had been proposed but never successfully implemented. The Mitchell approach might work, one of them said, but that research was buried decades ago. Nobody's been able to replicate those results. Mitchell, Sarah asked, joining their conversation. Is that someone current? Both professors looked at her with the patient expression reserved for young researchers who hadn't yet learned their history. Lawrence Mitchell, the older one, explained, brilliant theoretical physicist. Did groundbreaking work in the 1970s and 80s, quantum field theory, particle physics, some of the most elegant mathematical frameworks anyone had ever seen. What happened to him? Sarah asked, though something cold was already forming in her stomach. Disappeared from academia around 1990. Some say he had a breakdown, others think he just got tired of the politics. His work was ahead of its time, but he never got the recognition he deserved. Shame, really. He could have been one of the greats. Sarah felt the world tilt slightly. What did he look like? The professors exchanged glances. Older now, obviously, quiet man, gray hair. Why? That afternoon, Sarah marched directly to the security desk where Larry was reading a journal on advanced quantum mechanics. She placed her hands on the desk and looked him directly in the eye. "Your name isn't Larry, is it?" she said quietly. He looked up from his reading, and for a moment, she saw something flicker in his expression. Not fear, not embarrassment, but a kind of tired recognition. "It's Lawrence," he said simply. "But Larry's fine." "Lawrence Mitchell," she pressed. "The Lawrence Mitchell who revolutionized quantum field theory in the 1980s. He closed the journal carefully and set it aside. "That was a long time ago, Dr. Mitchell," Sarah said, and something in her voice made him look up again. "Do you know who I am?" "Dr. Sarah Chen," he said, "postdoc, quantum field theory. I've read your papers. Good work." She felt a chill. "You've read my papers?" "I read everything that comes through here. It's one of the perks of working in an academic library. Access to all the latest research." Sarah sat down in the chair across from his desk, the chair usually reserved for students with questions about library policies. "Dr. Mitchell, your work on quantum chromodynamics, it's the foundation of my entire research program. I've been building on equations you developed 30 years ago." He nodded slowly. The Chun-Rodriguez approach to gauge field normalization. "I saw that paper last month. Clever extension of the original framework." "You're reviewing my work," Sarah said, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. "You're sitting here in a security uniform, reading my papers, and you're the person who made my career possible." Larry Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. "You made your career possible, Dr. Chen." "I just wrote down some equations." "Why?" she asked. "Why are you here? Why aren't you teaching? Why aren't you at Princeton or MIT or CERN?" He smiled then, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Because I like the quiet." Over the following weeks, Sarah began staying late at the library, not to research, but to talk with Lawrence. She learned that he had indeed left academia voluntarily in 1990, burned out by the politics, the competition, and the pressure to constantly publish or perish. He'd taken the security job at Hamilton because it gave him access to the latest research without the burden of academic responsibilities. "I still do the work," he explained one evening as they sat in the empty library. "I just don't publish it anymore. I solve problems for my own satisfaction, not for tenure committees." Sarah discovered that Lawrence had been quietly contributing to the field for decades, just not in any way that would get him recognition. He'd been sending anonymous corrections to journals, leaving helpful notes for graduate students, and occasionally pointing researchers in the right direction when they were stuck. "There's a paper I've been working on," Sarah said one night. "It's about quantum entanglement in multidimensional field spaces. I've been stuck on the mathematical framework for months." Lawrence listened as she described the problem, occasionally asking questions that revealed the depth of his understanding. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. "Have you considered a topological approach?" he asked. "Instead of trying to solve the equations in conventional spacetime, what if you mapped the entanglement relationships onto a higher dimensional manifold?" Sarah stared at him. That's brilliant. But the mathematical complexity would be enormous. "Not if you use the right tools," Lawrence said. He pulled out a notebook from his satchel and began sketching equations. "See if you apply a modified version of the Artier-Singer index theorem here, and combine it with a fiber bundle approach." For the next 3 hours, Sarah watched in amazement as Lawrence worked through mathematical concepts that she'd never seen before. He was creating new mathematics on the fly, building elegant solutions to problems that had stumped her for months. "Where did you learn this?" she asked, looking at the pages of equations that represented months of work compressed into a single evening. "I didn't learn it," Lawrence said quietly. "I developed it. In 1987, I was working on a unified field theory that would explain quantum entanglement as a geometric property of spacetime itself. I published the basic framework, but I never shared the complete mathematical toolkit. Why not?" He looked at her with an expression that carried decades of weariness. "Because I realized that the most beautiful discoveries are often the most dangerous. The mathematics I was developing could revolutionize physics, but it could also be weaponized. I chose to keep it quiet." Sarah felt like she was sitting across from a living legend who had chosen to become invisible. "Dr. Mitchell, you have to come back. The physics community needs this work. You could solve problems that we're still struggling with." Lawrence shook his head. "I'm exactly where I need to be, Dr. Chen. I'm still contributing to the field, just not in the way that wins Nobel Prizes." "But the recognition is for people who need external validation," he interrupted gently. "I know what I've contributed. That's enough." As their conversations continued, Sarah began to understand that Lawrence's exile from academia wasn't a retreat, but a strategic choice. He'd found a way to continue his life's work without the burden of fame, politics, or institutional pressure. He was, in his own way, the freest scientist she'd ever met. But Sarah also realized that the scientific community was missing out on insights that could advance human understanding by decades. Lawrence had been working in isolation, developing theories that addressed some of the biggest questions in modern physics. "What about the students?" Sarah asked one evening. What about the next generation of physicists who could benefit from learning directly from you? Lawrence was quiet for a long moment. I teach, he said finally, just not in classrooms. What do you mean? Every graduate student who's ever asked me for help finding a paper, every researcher who's ever seemed stuck on a problem, every person who's ever shown genuine curiosity about the universe, I help them. I might not stand at a blackboard, but I'm still teaching. Sarah realized that she had been one of those students, the anonymous corrections in journals, the helpful suggestions from librarians, the perfectly timed access to rare papers. Lawrence had been quietly guiding young physicists for years. There's something else, Lawrence said, reaching into his satchel. He pulled out a thick manuscript, bound in simple black covers. I've been working on something, a unified theory that connects quantum mechanics, general relativity, and consciousness itself. Sarah's eyes widened. A theory of everything. Not everything, Lawrence said with a smile, but maybe enough. I've been developing it for 20 years. It's mathematically complete, experimentally testable, and philosophically coherent. It explains quantum entanglement, dark matter, and the hard problem of consciousness as different aspects of the same fundamental phenomenon. He handed her the manuscript. I want you to have this. Sarah's hands trembled as she accepted the document. Dr. Mitchell, this could change everything. Why are you giving it to me? Because you're the first person in 30 years who looked at a security guard and saw a physicist, Lawrence said. Because you had the curiosity to ask questions and the humility to listen to the answers. Because you represent the future of physics, and this work belongs to the future. Sarah spent the next week reading the manuscript, and with each page her amazement grew. Lawrence had indeed developed a unified theory that addressed the biggest questions in physics. The mathematics were elegant, the predictions were testable, and the implications were staggering. But more than that, she realized that Lawrence had been testing her all along. Every late-night conversation, every problem he'd helped her solve, every insight he'd shared, it had all been preparation for this moment. What do you want me to do with this? She asked when she returned the manuscript. Publish it, Lawrence said simply. Take the credit. Build your career on it. Become the physicist you were meant to be. I can't do that, Sarah protested. This is your work. You deserve the recognition. Lawrence shook his head. I already have everything I need. I have the satisfaction of knowing that I solved the puzzle. You have a career to build and a future to secure. This work will do more good in your hands than it ever could in mine. Sarah realized that she was witnessing something unprecedented. In academia, a brilliant mind choosing to remain invisible, to let others take credit for discoveries that could win Nobel Prizes. There's a condition, Lawrence said. You can't tell anyone where you got this. As far as the world knows, you developed this theory yourself. Can you live with that? Sarah looked at the manuscript, then at the man who had just offered her the keys to scientific immortality. What about the truth? The truth is that science is bigger than any individual scientist, Lawrence said. The truth is that the universe doesn't care who gets credit for understanding it. The truth is that some of us are meant to discover, and others are meant to disappear. In the months that followed, Sarah prepared to publish the unified theory as her own work. She struggled with the ethics of it, but Lawrence had made his choice clear. He wanted to remain invisible, to continue his quiet work in the library, to be the guardian of knowledge rather than its celebrated discoverer. The paper was published in the Journal of Theoretical Physics and immediately caused a sensation. Sarah Chen, the young postdoc who had solved the greatest puzzle in physics, became an overnight celebrity. Job offers poured in from every major university in the world, but every morning at 6:45, Lawrence Mitchell still unlocked the physics. Librarians settled into his chair by the entrance. Students still called him Library Larry, still barely noticed him, still had no idea that the quiet man reading advanced physics textbooks was the actual genius behind the greatest scientific discovery of the century. And Sarah, now Dr. Sarah Chen, full professor at Princeton University and the youngest recipient of the Nobel Prize in Physics, still visited the Hamilton Library whenever she could. She would sit across from Lawrence's desk and they would discuss the universe, two physicists sharing the greatest secret in academia. Do you ever regret it? She asked him one day. Lawrence looked up from his book, smiled, and shook his head. I spent my whole career trying to understand the universe. Now I know that the universe understands itself through all of us. I'm just glad I could help it along. As she left the library that day, Sarah realized that she had learned more from a security guard than she had from any professor. She had learned that true genius doesn't need recognition, that the greatest discoveries often come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the most profound act of courage is choosing to remain invisible. The students still called him Library Larry, still rushed past his desk without a second glance, still had no idea that they were in the presence of one of the greatest minds in human history, and Lawrence Mitchell, the man who had solved the mysteries of existence and then chosen to return to silence, was exactly where he wanted to be. Because some people change the world by standing in the spotlight, others change it by choosing to remain in the shadows, quietly ensuring that the light continues to shine. The next time you pass by someone in a uniform, someone sitting quietly in a corner, someone who seems ordinary and unremarkable, remember Library Larry. Remember that genius often wears the most humble disguise, and that the person you're ignoring might be the reason you understand the universe at all. So now I ask you, have you ever met someone like Lawrence Mitchell? Someone whose true brilliance was hidden beneath an ordinary exterior? Someone who chose service over recognition, wisdom over fame? Share their story in the comments. Tell us how they changed your life. Honor the invisible geniuses who shaped our world, because at the Human Stories, we believe that the greatest minds are often the quietest ones. And sometimes, the most profound discoveries happen when we finally learn to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, subscribe and help us honor those whose greatest achievements remain invisible. We'll see you in the next story. And until then, pay attention to the quiet ones. They might be the most important people in the room.